Have you ever felt completely exhausted by religion? Like no matter how hard you try, there's always another rule to follow, another expectation to meet, and if you slip up, you're instantly judged. If you've ever felt weighed down by a checklist of do's and don'ts, you aren't alone. In fact, Jesus addressed this exact kind of burnout over 2,000 years ago. Prior to the events we're going to talk about today, Jesus gave one of the promises in Scripture. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. He promised a light burden for weary souls. After offering that rest, Jesus collided head on with a group of religious leaders who had turned God's day of rest into a heavy burden. We're going to look at how Jesus completely redefined the rules, proving that God's mercy and goodness will always outweigh rituals and rules. Our story starts in Matthew chapter 12 on a Sabbath day. Jesus and his disciples were walking through some grain fields, and the disciples were hungry. As they walked, they began to pick some heads of grain, rub them in their hands to separate the husk, and eat the snack. Now, according to the law of Moses, it was completely legal for travelers to pick the grain from the edge of a field as long as they didn't use a sickle. But the Pharisees, the strict religious leaders of the day, were watching, and they were quick to jump on this. Why? Because the disciples did this on the Sabbath. Setting apart the Sabbath for rest and refreshment was the fourth of the 10 Commandments. But the Pharisees had taken God's gift of rest and complicated it. They developed 39 meticulous categories of what they considered work, and 11 of those related just to harvesting wheat. They actually believed that plucking and rubbing a handful of grain meant the disciples were illegally reaping, threshing, winnowing, and preparing food. These rules were so extreme that even the rabbis admitted their Sabbath laws were like mountains hanging by a hair. The Pharisees were caught up on a technicality, caring more about their strict interpretations than the fact that these men were simply hungry. So how does Jesus respond? He doesn't just argue their technicalities, he points them to Scripture. He reminds them of a famous story about Israel's greatest king, David. When David and his men were fleeing from King Saul for their lives and desperate for food, they ate the consecrated bread of the presence in the tabernacle. By law, only priests were allowed to eat that bread. Yet David wasn't condemned because human need is always more important than ritual laws. Jesus then points out that priests violate the Sabbath every week by doing the heavy work of sacrificing animals in the temple. Yet they are considered innocent because they are doing God's work. And then Jesus drops a theological bomb. He quotes the prophet Hosea, telling the Pharisees, "If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent." You see, the Pharisees missed the entire heart of God. God's desire is for his people to reflect his mercy and loving care, rather than just checking off boxes on a religious to-do list. Then to top it all off, Jesus declares, "For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath." He is claiming absolute divine authority. He is saying, "I am the one who gave the law. I am greater than the temple and I am the only one who can tell you what the Sabbath is truly for. Jesus didn't just teach this principle, he put it into action. Later, Jesus went into their synagogue, and there was a man with a withered, useless right hand. This was a massive hardship in a culture where you had to work with your hands to survive. The Pharisees, hoping to trap Jesus, asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" Their strict oral law dictated that you could only provide medical relief on the Sabbath if a life was in immediate danger. You couldn't set a bone, tie a bandage, or even pray for the sick, according to some of the strictest rules. Jesus exposes their hypocrisy with a simple question. If you had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't you lift it out? Of course they would. Then Jesus delivers the powerful punchline. A person is worth far more than a sheep. So it is lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath. Jesus understood that the Sabbath was made for the good of man and the glory of God. Jesus tells the man to stretch out his withered hand, and instantly it is restored. He didn't even work to do it. He didn't touch the man or use medicine. He just spoke. Jesus intentionally healed the man to show that the true purpose of the Sabbath and all of God's law is to do good and reflect God's loving character. Now, you'd think the Pharisees would be amazed by this miracle. Instead, they were filled with rage. Matthew tells us they went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. Don't miss the tragic irony here. These religious leaders were so obsessed with protecting their man-made rules about resting on the Sabbath that they completely missed God standing right in front of them. In their zeal to keep the letter of the law, they went out on the Sabbath day and plotted a murder, violating the 4th and 6th commandments. They valued their traditions more than an image bearer of God who had just been healed. Jesus showed us that God's laws were never meant to be an end in themselves. They were meant to restrict people from hurting each other and to give them loving guidelines intended to bless and give rest. Here is my challenge for you today. Are there areas in your life where you care more about the rules than the genuine needs of the people right in front of you? Think of one way you can actively display the loving heart of God through your actions this week. Maybe it's showing mercy to a coworker who messed up, or helping someone even if it inconveniences your schedule. In this video lesson helped you see Jesus and the Sabbath in a new light. Share this video with someone who might need a reminder of God's incredible mercy. Remember, mercy and goodness always outweigh ritual and law. Thanks for watching, and God bless you.